All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Want to welcome everybody to this month's edition of the Beyond Compliance webinar and podcast series. I'm Brian Sharp with SafetyChain Software, and really want to thank all of you for joining us. It appears by the registration. This is definitely a topic of interest, and so we're excited to bring in our friends over at Alchemy today, whom I'll be introducing here in a moment, to talk about Workforce 2020 and specifically how technology is changing our approach to training for food safety employees. And I think having seen some of the content that's going to be shared, there's a lot of really great insight here, but also a lot of really great tactical advice that you'll get from one of the great thought leaders in the industry, Laura Dunn, and I'll bring her in just a moment. So thanks for being here. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. It's good to see some new faces. This is a series we started almost a couple of years ago now with the idea of providing just a real informal, tactical, practical training environment where we bring in thought leaders and practitioners and consultants and everybody in between to really just talk about strategies and things that are working in the industry. And the idea is that you walk away hopefully with something you can apply to your own facilities. And so we will keep putting these on if you keep coming, and we always welcome topic ideas, even presenters that you would like to hear more from. But it's been really a pleasure to do this, and at SafetyChain, this is something we believe is a big part of our responsibility to the community. So we put these on for free, and we're also really grateful for all the presenters that come on and provide their valuable time as well. So you'll hear a lot through these different series, as you will today, about tactical and strategy. Today we're obviously talking more about technology and how it intertwines with the workforce, but on the back end of this is where we can often help you and your facilities with our food quality management system. So if you do have a technology project, you're looking for a way to improve your throughput and your yield and your compliance, this is where we can complement a lot of what we share on these series. So we certainly welcome you to stop by our website at safetychain.com. We've got some really exciting things going on, and we would always welcome the chance to share a little bit more about what we're doing and how we could help you. So with that, a little bit of the old housekeeping here. So for those that haven't joined us in the past, this is a presentation, and obviously, there's a lot of great content, but we'd like these to be somewhat informal. So the approach here is if we were kind of all sitting around chatting, and so this is designed to be, really beneficial to you, and hopefully you'll see the content on the slides that you can reference later, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the other thing is this is for you. So I would encourage you to ask questions. We're going to hold the questions till the end. We're going to carve out a little bit of time for Q&A. That's often my favorite part, but my recommendation is if we get on a topic where you have a question, fire it away right then while it's top of mind, and that way we can track those and get to them. If we're unable to get to all of them, a couple of promises there. One, sometimes they get a little too specific or down in the weeds, and we'll take those offline. But also, Laura and her team at Alchemy have been gracious enough to offer to help with any questions afterward if we aren't able to get to all of them. So certainly encourage you to share those. You also notice when you do share those, it's just the panelists on here, so you're not broadcasting them to the world. And I'll cover the number one question as always, which is, yes, we are recording this. And again, Alchemy and Laura's team are kind enough to allow us to share the slides afterward in addition to the recording. So if you just can't get enough, you want to send this as a holiday gift, or probably more likely some colleagues or friends that weren't able to join us today, we certainly encourage you to share those links, and we love sharing this. And we also post this on our resource page and on YouTube, so pretty easy to access afterward. Last but not least, we were all kind of joking before we went live here, these webinar tools, they have their own little quirks, and so if you have any issues with audio, there are two ways to connect. One is with your obviously your phone, and one's with the computer. If you're having trouble with one, the old IT desk deal of unplug it and plug back in, or just try the other line. But we do have someone on our team standing by. You can use the chat box if you're having some tech issues. We'll do our best to help you there. and use the question box for any questions that you may have. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to bring in somebody who I am really, really excited to have join us. I've been trying to track her down and tackle her for a couple years, and so I'm really excited to have Laura here today. I'm sure many of you, if you've been to any conference or read anything online, chances are you've come across Laura and her work, but I'm going to share a little bio just in case. Laura Dunn Nelson is our guest presenter today. She's the Vice President of Food Safety and Global Alliances at Intertek Alchemy. She has over 25 years of experience implementing food safety and quality control programs for processing, packaging, food service, and retail operations. She's worked with global retailers and manufacturers in the implementation of their GFSI certification programs. And prior to Intertek Alchemy, Laura managed Silica's South Region food testing laboratories, where she did a variety of things, including implementing ISO requirements, GMP, HACCP audits, trained food safety auditors, and a whole lot more. Her hands-on experience in testing food products has assisted food companies in successful implementation of good manufacturing practices, quality assurance, and HACCP programs. And she's a proud graduate of the University of Texas with both science and microbiology. And she's an all-around, just super awesome, fun, positive person to be around. So Laura, welcome. We're really, really pleased to have you here, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brian.
You are welcome.
Gosh, thanks to Cheryl and Ann and yourself and the whole SafetyChain team. What an honor to be part of this. I've been attending some of these webinars for years myself, and they're renowned. So it's really a privilege to be a part of this one. And I'm just so thankful to all of you that have carved out that all important hour. That's a tough haul. So thank you very much for joining us. And my absolute goal is to provide you some real good information that you can use in your own facility. That's kind of my calling. And I got tickled, Brian, when you said that we can give this as a Christmas gift, that holiday gift.
I like it. My wife is going to love that.
Yes. So I have a number of grandchildren that would love it too. So anyway, thank you all very much. What I'm going to do is start off with a couple questions to get us pondering. The first one is why should we improve our training and communications program? You know, we've got a lot on our plate and there's more coming every day. So why in the world can we not just hunker down in status quo and just let the training and communication be and focus our efforts on other things? So I'd like to, I hopefully will be presenting some very good reasons on why we do need to improve our training and communications program. Additionally, I'm asking all of you, are our employees learning from our food safety training? So yes, we do training, but are they actually learning what we want them to learn? And I'd like to get started by a little bit of an auditing story. As Brian shared, I worked for Silica for many years, and part of my duties and responsibilities was a auditor. And I audited a particular plant that I was intrigued with. And as a good auditor, I did do the desk review, and this is a similar document that I reviewed, cleaning and sanitizing log. You're all familiar with these. This one looked really good. It had everything filled out and completed. All the initials were there, and the concentration was right where it was supposed to be. Surprisingly, always at 200 parts per million, but we won't discuss that. But it was all the information was there. So obviously, the next part of an auditor is to see things in process. So I asked them if I could go out and see the actual sanitation in progress, and so I did. And there was a gentleman spraying quaternary ammonium on the conveyor belts equipment, and I asked him what the parts per million should be. He answered readily, 200 parts per million. And I said, great, and let's check it, or have you checked it? And he said, no, I haven't checked it, but we have a system that automatically creates that concentration, so not sure we need to. And I said, well, let's just double check as a verification. So it took a while to hunt down the litmus paper, and we did check it, and it was surprisingly 0 parts per million. He was surprised and I was surprised, and he said, well, clearly this paper's gone bad or old, and let's get us some new paper. We're going to retest it. So we got a brand new roll, retested it probably 5 or 6 times. All of them were 0 parts per million. And so what we saw is that I said, well, let's go look at the barrels. So when we went out to look at the system, we could tell immediately that the barrel was empty. There was no more chemical quat in there in the barrel. It was empty, and nobody had really checked. So for some period of time, they had been spraying their line, thinking that they were applying quat to it, and in fact, they were just applying water. And so for me, that was an example of a bit of a disconnect. They had a new process, or a fairly new process, of this metering system for chemicals, and there was some changes that needed to happen on a verification side, and they weren't in place, right? They were kind of just relying on the system and making it work. And so I see this disconnect happening a lot as new technologies introduced, and I think we need to be questioning that. If we kind of explore this intersection between technology and automation and how it impacts training, I think it's important to look at several studies, and I hope you find these interesting. One of the things that I've spent some time with is this Mercer study on global talent trends. And, I think it's important that we look really to leverage new technology to improve our organizational culture and productivity. Many of us are doing that as we speak, but we need to understand really what helps our employees excel at work and how these technologies will impact them. So in this particular study, and by the way, just reinforcing, you will get the data here. You don't have to make a lot of notes, but the top 3 considerations for employees, and this is global data, but the number 1, ability to manage my work life and balance. So I think we all agree, myself included, gosh, we can do all things if we just have that balance between work and life. So that's number 1. Number 2, recognition for my contributions. We do have employees that are really wanting and will thrive if we give them that much needed recognition. So we'll talk a little bit more about recognition programs in just a moment. And then number 3, and this is an important one, opportunities to learn new skills and technologies. It's the 3rd top thing that these employees want, the opportunity to learn new skills and technologies. Let's think about that. Most of our organizations are historically really hesitant to bring on new technologies because of the adoption challenges, right? Because these data points, we're not used to, but this really indicates that our employees are willing to embrace new technologies. In fact, they want to do that. That's how they're going to grow and receive value in what they're doing as they learn new skills. So I really think we might need to do a little bit of a mental shift in the fact that many of our employees are welcoming this kind of opportunity to embrace new technology and embrace new automation, for example. And I do think it's important to note that employees in specific countries have very different preferences. So I gave you the global results, but certainly the results, like in France, the number 1 consideration is a fun work environment. So for those of us that have sister plants in different countries, different areas, I think we have to realize that what programs we put in place to better engage employees and to train employees, some of those motivators are going to be different. And so knowing what that is important. if I'm reading between the lines here, some of you may think, well, that's great for this study, Laura, but that doesn't reflect our employees. And so, gosh, I encourage you to use these data points and do a little mini survey in your own plant. Create list these out, have them rate it one or check the top 3 that really motivates them, set it up in your break room, and have you figure out what exactly drives your employees, what makes them thrive and excel. Because it's really important as you put new programs together or improve on programs around training and in better engagement, that we know how they're going to be received and are we addressing those needs. Another trend, and this is from Deloitte. So this is from their Global Human Capital Trends report. So 86% of the respondents believe that they've got to reinvent the way people learn, the #1 trend. And we're going to see this, I think, 2020 and beyond. And this refocus on how people learn, I think, is against the backdrop of the acceleration that we have on artificial intelligence adoption, new technologies, and automation. And in fact, that's what this study says. So and this was a very large study. This had over 10,000 respondents in 119 countries. And so by far, this reinventing the way people learn is a huge trend in the industry. If we explore a little bit more, this study by IBM had identified 120 million workers projected in the world's largest economies may need to be retrained as a result of artificial intelligence and automation. And in fact, this is a really great study, and I encourage you to the Enterprise Guide to Closing the Skills Gap. Lots of great information there. One of the things I found fascinating is if you look at 2014, it took 3 days on average to close a capability gap with training. But in 2018, it took 36 days, almost 10 times longer to close a capabilities gap. And I think if we look at some of the reasons for that, particularly in our industry, I think we're looking at and highlighting this shift we've made from preventative controls and how we've gone from command and control to this preventative controls where we need everybody on point to help us, right? We're distributing the responsibility of food safety across our organization. And we've done that to address the compliance side, the regulation side. But I think this mindset, we've not really prepared those employees properly to make those hard calls, to clearly understand what food safety is all about, what food safety issues are out there, and to be able and have the confidence to make those decisions. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. I found a quote from Ginny Rometty, who was the president and CEO of IBM, and she said, "I expect AI to change 100% of jobs in the next 5 to 10 years." So that means your job and my job is projected to change. So the ability for us to change is the ability of us to learn and relearn. This retraining is going to be super, super important. We hear a lot about AI and automation and blockchain, all kinds of things, and some of it is a little scary, this whole change management process. But I will say that the World Economic Forum estimates that AI and automation is also going to create 58 million net new jobs by 2022. So it's not just we think about technology kind of taking over and jobs will be eliminated. In fact, there's going to be a significant amount, 58 million net new jobs projected for 2022. But net new jobs means new skills, new requirements, new expectations. And so again, that points to we're going to have to be very adept in our training and working on change. It's an unprecedented change. There's no two ways about it. And so it's going to have put new demands on our workforce strategies, and we need to meet those demands to really stay ahead. So I wouldn't be complete unless I just touched on the ROI of engagement. So we've all heard the Gallup polls where, gosh, upwards of 85% of our employees are unengaged or are not engaged, which kind of points to some of the challenges that we all have in trying to have them follow our food safety rules or workplace safety rules. And the idea here is that a more engaged employee is going to deliver value to our organization. And Queen's University, Hewitt did this study, and they interviewed 200 companies really to measure the employee engagement levels, and then they compared that performance with high performance in the performance of the actual company, and contrasted and compared low performance, low engagement, high performance, high engagement. And what they found is those that are more engaged, they have greater customer satisfaction, as you can see, pretty significant, 30%. Greater employee productivity, 26% less employee turnover. And gosh, for our sector, gosh, if we could just improve by a couple percentage points, that delivers a lot of value to our organization. If we can make a turnaround on that, decreasing that turnover, huge. Employee absenteeism, more employees feel more like a team. They don't want to let people down, and they get more satisfaction out of their jobs, so they're going to show up. All really important stuff, and we see that every day with our customers. So having a more engaged workforce is absolutely key. For example, let's see, we worked with Maple Leaf to provide them the technology and training content, and they did a pre and post measurement over a period of time, and they found an improved food safety culture across their 32 plants with higher engagement. They had improved one-on-one employee communications, more aligned behaviors. And for them, they also had a significant 60% reduction in recordable incidents. So a lot of value in a more highly engaged workforce. All right, we've talked about automation and the impact of new technology and the absolute forecast from a lot of different directions that change is going to be important, and we're going to have to do some reskilling. It's not a if, it's a when. So let's talk about our learning organization. And I wanted to just start, this may be a little basic for everybody, but just to level set all of us, training is the teaching of a skill or behavior, and learning is that acquisition of knowledge or skills through being taught, but also through experience in studies. And then communication is imparting or exchanging of information, and we'll talk more about that later. But the thing I want to just underscore, and we all know this, but training, that formal classroom training, it's just a tiny little part. In fact, this probably could have been a little tiny pin dot. But our employees are learning a lot of different ways, from their peers to learning where the exceptions can be made, to seeing how their supervisors are modeling food safety behavior, or even their leadership. So they're getting inputs all the time and every day, far beyond our formal classroom. And so we do need to understand that that has an impact on our learning organization. I had the privilege, absolute privilege, of being a participant on the GFSI Food Safety Culture Technical Working Group, and I was chair of the People Division. So many of you have looked at the position paper that was a result of our technical working group, and if you haven't, make a note, mygfsi.com, and it's that position paper. Food safety culture is on there. Highly recommend it. It's a good read, and there's lots of good information there. we're going to talk about the learning organization and communication. So in the people set, we identified several key considerations, but for this particular talk, I want to focus on learning organization and communication, and there's plenty there. So for learning organization, we're going to talk briefly about employee capability. How are we preparing those employees to do the jobs and the behaviors we want? We're going to talk about effective training, training reinforcement, behavior accountability, and employee empowerment. And I'm going to present this in a way that I hope provides value to each of you, in that I'm going to contrast and compare a mature learning organization, some of the key attributes, and an immature and a mature organization. And hopefully you'll be able to see and where you are kind of fall in the sphere, and maybe there's some things that you want to address to improve your culture in this area. So the first thing we want to talk about is employee capability. So if we look at some characteristics of employee capability, one of the things we see in immature cultures is this universal training content. Just this, everybody gets the same information. If we contrast that to a more mature culture, we see that people are moving to specific content that's really based on their specific job role and function, which is super important, right? And we see some of this this work going on, and it makes perfect sense, right? Because as an adult learner, if I'm sitting down and I'm watching a sanitation training, and I never have to spray chemicals, I don't have, I'm not applying, let's say, half of what I'm seeing in my day-to-day job, automatically my brain says, Laura, you don't have to pay attention to this. This doesn't apply to you. The problem with Laura's brain is that I'm also saying, I don't know how important that is, and I don't know how important that is, so I'm not going to really pay attention to some of this. And in fact, I'm not making those clear decisions. As an adult learner, we want to know what is necessary for our job so that we can apply it immediately. And by the way, if we don't apply it, we're not going to use it. So if we are getting extraneous material trained to us, we're not, it's just a waste of time, personally. So that's really important. And we look at comprehension, and maybe we have some lack of comprehension, and versus complete comprehension, and how are we testing that? This idea of lack of confidence versus high confidence, I see that as a big differentiator between immature and mature cultures. So if we look at this this diagram, what we want is everybody to be in that top left-hand corner. We want every one of our employees to have a really high understanding and a high confidence in what they're doing. Those people, we don't have a risk, right? They're doing the right things and they know to do the right things. The questionable, the higher risk folks, and the people that we need to ferret out and resolve and improve are those bottom left. It's those people in our organization, those employees that have a high confidence to do what they do, but they have the wrong understanding. They're not doing the wrong thing, but confidently. Maybe they've seen some exceptions in the past and I think that's okay. Maybe these are some of our more senior people that are doing things the same way they did and they're making that change. Regardless, these are the people that we need to identify and to correct those behaviors. Those are our high risk folks. So you can see we probably, if you look in our organizations, we probably have some of all these people, right? We have low understanding because they just joined our organization and they need to be trained, provided orientation training. We have some people that are not just started, but maybe in their 60, 90-day period, they just have a low confidence. They just got trained, they know what they need to do, but they probably need some encouragement and mentoring and coaching and some attention, oversight from their supervisors to reinforce what they're doing. So we have a smattering of all of these, and I think it's important that we have a training organization that can address each one of these very deliberately and help to align the behaviors across our organization. If we look at effective training, gosh, many of you will go, yeah, I get it, Laura, effective training, that's, of course, right? But how do we know it's effective training? And some of the subsets that we see is in immature cultures, we have QA is curating the training. They're creating the training. And that's in contrast to those that are using a more of a cross-functional training development team, actually tapping into employees and saying, hey, here's the issues, can you help us train against that? And letting them be a participant in the development of the training. I'm a microbiologist. I like to talk about Listeria monocytogenes and efficacies and biofilms and all those kinds of things. But when I talk about that, it's probably not the appropriate level that we need to share with our workforce, our employees. And so we have to make sure that the information we're trying to train them on is received in a way that is effective. We work with one company that really takes this to a new level. So they'll use their employees to act out the wrong behaviors, and they have this big red X on that as part of the training. And then they have them act out the appropriate behaviors, and they have a big green check mark where they capture that in their training materials. So, and by the way, their employees love seeing their friends up on the screen. So, gosh, any way you can involve across different functions and include those employees in building training, man, it's really effective. We still see a lot of people doing that one and done annual training, just a learning, not learning, a training dump of everything about food safety, slips, trips, and falls, lockout, tag out, how long the breaks should be, how you get paid. I mean, just everything all at once versus that routine, ongoing training. And gosh, we just know people cannot retrain. You know, they can't maintain all that information that we give them. And so consequently, we see more mature cultures using more of a blended learning. So not just classroom, but that reinforcement, 10 days, 30 days, 60 day, 90 day reinforcing, making sure that these employees know, and then they have that high confidence, right? And also, what we do see is on lack of training metrics, right? So people that are not measuring training effectiveness. So that's the whole title. And yet, how are we really measuring? Almost every year, we do a global food safety training survey with our partner Camden and a number of organizations. And one of the questions we always ask is this one. So despite your efforts in employee food safety training, do you still have employees not following your food safety program on the floor, not exhibiting the behaviors you want? And this is a static 67%. It fluctuates a couple percentages, but the majority of people say yes, despite all of our training, despite the time and the resources we put forth, we still don't get everybody following our program. And so my question to our industry is, so why? Why aren't they following? What's the problems? Are we doing our own root cause analysis of why that's the case? I'm going to rely on my auditing experience for another quick story. So I was watching employees come in and wash their hands before they go on the line. And I was there with the QA manager. He was right there by my side. And after a couple minutes, I leaned over and I said, do you see what I'm seeing? And he said, I do, Laura, and I just don't get it. I see nobody's using soap, and I don't understand because we just did a refresher training last week as a reminder on what the process is for washing their hands. And he was just dumbfounded. I mean, why in the world, especially how awkward in front of an auditor, you never want to be in that situation. So an employee walked by and I said, excuse me, can I ask you a quick question? And they said, yes. And I said, can you tell me why you're not using soap? And the person said, yeah, it's out. There is no soap. It's empty. And so the dispensers were empty, and it kind of goes back to my first story, similar, but the missing piece there is that we don't effectively wash our hands unless we have soap. So we don't go forward, and we there should be a process for alerting a supervisor or sanitation saying, hey, we need soap. We can't get out there, right? So there's this missing piece of understanding, and I sometimes think it falls on the why of what we're doing. But these processes are important, right? So training reinforcement. So what we see on a more immature culture is lack of food safety modeling. So what do I mean by that? Well, we have maybe maintenance walking through without all the PPEs, or maybe even senior leadership is dashing across the plant floor and they don't have a hairnet on. Obviously, versus food safety being modeling at all levels of the organization. So no exceptions. And then induction training, right? Only versus ongoing food safety communications. And this is a really big one. Negative behaviors addressed in an immature culture versus negative and positive behaviors addressed. So that's where we see a pretty big tipping point where people are getting feedback. Remember, what employees thrive on is that getting recognized for their contributions. So these employees want to know that they're doing a good job. Man, these PPEs, it's a lot, right? To get on, pull on. It's not our normal weekend wear. But reinforcing that, hey, thanks for wearing all this. We really appreciate it. You're protecting our product and the consumers. That's important to us. Giving that quick feedback and having a mechanism to do that really separates immature versus mature. And then supervisors providing corrective actions versus peer-to-peer. So this reinforcement is a big thing, right? Because everybody knows about the forgetting curve, right? You won't remember really anything that I'm presenting, maybe one of my stories, I don't know, in next month, but that's how we are. That's how our brain is wired. We have so much overload. We're just not remembering, and especially things as complex as and different for many of our cultures of employees within our organization. It's not something that we all intuitively know. And so it's got to be reinforced. Behavior accountability. So behavior accountability, this is where we start to see a pretty big divide in where supervisors, management, QA are driving accountability, in this case for training, but in general for food safety, versus a more mature culture having employees that are accountable. And so what does this look like? Well, so one of the things it looks like is we work with many companies that have moved away from formal classroom training, or not relying on that, but having more of an e-learning or kiosk mode where they have a learning plan for the individual employee, and they give them a time and a date in which they need to complete that. And if they want to continue working here, they get that done, right? And as adults, we kind of like to take control of our destiny. We like to be the the boss of ourselves. And so we see a lot of employees that really are adapting to this approach of accountability and taking a personal relationship. So the supervisor isn't having to hunt people down, put the schedule on the board, work with people that were absent and all of that. It goes back to that employee, and then they manage to that expectation. This goes back to the capability skills gap versus an ongoing skills gap. So as the change happens that I've talked about earlier, and we start introducing new technology, we introduce new AI, automation, new equipment, whatever it is, that we have a continual skills gap assessment where we say, gee, we need to retrain. For example, on that chemical metering, there was a change there. We needed to kind of retrain what our expectations were around applying that quaternary ammonium, right? And so looking at that and having a continuous gap assessment is important. We skip down to senior management, exempt from food safety training. I think many of our organizations go, oh gosh, the last thing we got a hard enough trouble getting our employees in this. Senior management, they don't have the time, they don't want to do food safety training, right? Immature culture. If we look at the mature culture, all levels of organization has food safety training, including those senior management. So really, really important. And the story that I like to tell on this, and Theo is one of my heroes in our industry. Theo is a training coordinator for a company, and she assigned all employees, including senior management, training very similar to what I described earlier. Everybody had to take the training, and she gave them 4 months to get that training done. And importantly, she gave them a consequence. The consequence was their key code to get into the plant would not work after 4 months if they did not have all their training done. So everybody wants a paycheck, so you can see how she had a pretty good compliance rate for her training completion. One day she received a call from receptionist, and the receptionist said, gosh, Theo, get down here, we got a problem. Our CEO is locked outside. So Theo goes downstairs and opens the door and goes out to talk to a very angry CEO who says, I'm locked out of my own building, what's going on? Theo explains, look, I made it very clear that you needed to complete your food safety training, and I gave you 4 months just like everybody else. We all have a role in food safety. We have to be trained, and you haven't completed it. And so you're not able to come into the plant. And believe it or not, I know many of you won't believe this, but believe it or not, the CEO took a deep breath and said, thank you, Theo. Thank you for holding all of us to a very high standard in food safety, and we need more of yous. I'm going to go home and get my training done. Now, I know many of you are sitting there going, no way, no how. That would not work for me, Laura. But I call this managerial courage. It takes that to push some of these maturity, more mature ideas into your organization. But I hopefully I've illustrated the reasons why you need to do that, but also the value in getting more mature and some of the positive return on your investment of doing that. Anyway, something to consider. Employee empowerment. So employee empowerment, immature employees cannot make food safety decisions. And even worse than that, if they do point out a food safety problem, they're highly discouraged and admonished for even considering stopping a line or questioning something in a batch, a hopper, or whatever. And of course, that gets passed around. That becomes a culture of don't say anything. You get in trouble if you say anything. Versus a mature culture where we have employees that are encouraged to make those food safety decisions. So 2 things: they know, they understand what they need to do, and they encourage each other, right? And they make those hard decisions. They have the confidence to make those hard decisions. And so that really separates a pretty dramatic difference. And so I'd like to just challenge each of you to say, in our organization, do we encourage our employees to make food safety decisions? Stop the line. We see something that's not compliant, or could be a problem, or alert the supervisor. Hey, I think we need to do something here, or do we not? We also talked about here on recognition programs, and again, we've already illustrated that most all of us really want recognition to the contribution that we're making, and I think it's important to look at how do we formalize that, because simply saying, yeah, everybody's doing a great job, it's more of a personal thing. At Alchemy, we have some immersion programs where we build bespoke programs that people are wanting to address certain issues, food safety issues, or even workplace safety issues within the organization. And we create different programs. And one of the things we always do is recognition cards. And so, and these are really easy for people to develop. And it's a great way to really reinforce the behaviors you want. And in fact, it's one of our most powerful tools as management to call out and do the attaboy or attagirl on the things that we see that are working well. I know some people are doing like SQF champions or food safety champions, where they're rewarded for identifying some considerations or suggesting some things that might improve food safety, or celebrating a particular internal audit score per division if somebody made some big improvements. Executing some very complex corrective actions, people reward that. So there's a number of ways you can do this. But I would just suggest that using recognition cards or some sort of recognition programs is important. The caution I would say is make sure this is not flavor of the month. Make sure that it's not so complex that you can't sustain it over time, because employees are a little, just ignore this one will go away too, this program. So you want to make it simple, and you want to be consistent at it, because this is important stuff. So keep it simple, and think about what you might be able to do in your organization. I'm going to mention just a little bit about communications, because the role of communications is really important. So this is different than formal training, right? It's how we cascade the food safety strategies of our organization down through our organization. And to the extent that you can be very transparent with that, and by that I mean that we know that our CEO, our president, our VP of operations believes in the importance of food safety. And here's what they say. Here's the must-haves, for example, and sharing best practices. Let's say there's some challenges on third shift, and we want to share that learning. Maybe we've done a root cause and we figured out, oh, gee, here's some things we need to improve on. Let's share it across the different shifts, right? The different organizations. Let's learn from our failures. A lot of times we identify a problem and we just in our own little world, and we look at it and we just solve it, resolve it, and go. And it repeats over and over and over. And it's because we're not learning and sharing our best practices and addressing those improvements that we've identified. So how do we do that? Well, we did a little research program where we hired a research organization, and we measured pre-training. What was the level of knowledge on food safety on pre-training and then post-training? So clearly, after training, there was an improvement on level of knowledge around food safety and behaviors. And then we said, well, what if we all added some observations, right? Let's observe what they're doing and have a two-way communication where we're giving feedback directly back to them. And by the way, this feedback is both positive and negative. So if we identified let's say there's 4 steps to food hand washing, an employee got all 3 and missed 1, we're going to recognize them for doing the 3. Way to go! But this one, let me show you how it's done, and then you have a communication, right? By the way, was our training not clear on this, or do you have some more questions on it? And after 3 observations, you can see that we almost reach 100% compliance. In fact, some of the plants that participated did reach 100% compliance. It was an amazing way and to really align behaviors over the course of time. You know, we did the study. 6 months later, we went back to the same plants and we said, gee, how's things going? And what was really interesting is we were told almost every plant said, you know what? What's amazing to us is we no longer need a supervisor that's holding that tablet and making those formal observations. Now, peer to peer, those people on the shift are, when they get a new person on the shift, they're saying, wait, you're doing it wrong. You need to do it this way. And now the peers are training and educating, but doing it in a very consistent and correct way. And so their performance was nice to see, was not only maintained but almost enhanced in several plant locations. So huge importance on this two-way communication. It goes back to my example of asking that employee, why aren't you using soap? Gosh, if only we ask, right? We can learn. And I hear this over and over again, people doing things, and when you ask them, they have some pretty valid reasons why they're not. How can we communicate or embrace communication within our facility? So there's a number of ways I'm seeing in the industry that people are using employee intranets and message boards. Their management is doing conferences, videos. We have lots of customers that are creating a training video with filming their CEO discussing the importance of food safety, right? And the commitment that they have to each and every one of employees and the role that they all play. And so imagine the importance of that for these new employees or existing employees to see that commitment. We talked about awards and recognitions, a number of ways that people are doing that. You know, a simple little newsletter and Facebook, social media is being used a lot within companies to really and talk about not just holidays and we're getting everybody gets a free frozen turkey. Pick up your frozen turkey next Tuesday, but more than that, they're talking about food safety and talking about what's working, right? What to focus on, how it's important. Maybe they're even focusing on somebody they've identified as doing a really good job and having call outs like that. Shift huddles, digital signage. So a lot of things. We recognize this whole, what I call rolling thunder. This communication is so important for reinforcing food safety training. We develop things like huddle guides for customers around a number of topics, posters, digital signage, all matched to particular topics every month. But you can do this yourself. You can have kind of like a top 3 focus, and you know, maybe it's temperature maintenance, maybe it's water control. So whatever your focus is, there's a number of ways to do that within your organization. But please hear me when I say reinforcing food safety is super important. You've got to elevate the voice of food safety at least as high as the daily operations and production challenges, and even the employee safety. So oftentimes we have a great employee safety or EHS program, but that's a focus, and food safety is not. So a little reciprocity on that. So really it comes down to, are our employees learning from our effective food safety training? And what are we doing to remain viable as we move into 2020 and beyond As we know, changes will be happening. We have to reskill, we have to retrain. And are we prepared to do that? So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
All right, thank you, Laura. Appreciate it. Perfect, right on time too. Got a few minutes left here. Um, I've got a whole bunch of notes, but first I just want to thank you for that. I think that whether, I know we have a lot of mutual customers listening today, but we have a lot of folks that are thinking about technology, they're retooling, their workforce challenges are something we hear a lot too. So I hope that everybody found that valuable, that regardless of what you're training, whether it's a food safety program, implementing new technology, new equipment, retooling in some capacity, I think there's a lot of really valuable things. And I think, what I'm hearing is the employees they want this technology, right? They're looking for it. It's part of job satisfaction and the engagement. And they're also very capable. Remember, if they can use their phones, they can use this technology out on the floor as well, but they need effective training. And I think that's what we focus today, is on that last bucket. And the last thing that I'll add, and I'm sure you can, you're a lot of your data supported this, but the most successful customers we see from our technology side, at least, when I have my interviews with them, and I just did one last week, the underlying theme, Laura, in almost every single story was how they got the teams engaged in not just setting up and implementing the technology, but how they rolled it out, how they trained it, how they reinforced it, and how they got the employees to really own it. And I think that's, you gave a lot of really great tips there. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. So we do have a few minutes here, and I know there are some questions, and I think there's a couple. I'll address the first one, which did come in during the course. Yes, we do have the slides, and we'll be able to share those. So want to thank Laura and her team for allowing us to do that as well. But Laura, one question is just about advice. You talked a little bit about change management. I'm going to rephrase this a bit, but I'm gonna generalize this a little bit and just say, can you give some advice on change management as companies are adopting new technology? Because that's where a lot of our audience is at, or considering as we go into next year.
Absolutely. I hear that a lot. They're considering great technology like yours. And so how do they tackle that? Well, you mentioned that as part of your debrief recently, is making sure you have an implementation plan, right? So and that you are engaging the teams that are going to be impacted and how they're going to be impacted, and you're creating that action plan for rolling out, and then actively monitoring that plan for success. So I guess I would focus in two areas. One, definitely get leaders on board with the change, right? So,
Mhm.
and this doesn't really mean relying solely on your typical go-to members, the people that are, okay, we got it, we're going to move forward, marching orders. It does mean engaging all your leaders, those kind of naysayers that are out there. Address their concerns and make sure that they are committed, because if they're not committed, you can't get everybody else committed on your team.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
two, speaking of committing, it's the resources for the change. So you talked about it, Brian. It's making sure that it goes beyond the technology acquisition, but it's really the time you're going to need to communicate, the training you're going to need on the new skills and the processes, and engaging those key stakeholders out there to make sure that the training that you've designed is going to be effective. So I love what you said about what you find is the people that are most engaged, have a part in the process, the more success you're going to have.
No, that's great. And one more I'm going to sneak in here. I'm kind of trying to combine these just for the sake of time here. But when we walk a floor, or just any planner or meeting with customers, a lot of we hear about this workforce challenge, right? It's tough to hire, it's tough to train, and you mentioned that T word, turnover, right? So can you talk a
Mm.
little bit about how technology is helping with turnover? I thought that was really interesting what you talked about, and shared some really cool statistics too.
Yeah. So you know, so it's tough, right? We know we're resource challenged in the labor pool, and our jobs are not fun, exciting jobs. Gosh, we've got some customers that have 100+% turnover. They're literally hiring 40 people, knowing that maybe 2 will
Yeah.
stay after
Right.
10 days. It's
Wild.
daunting, right? You're hearing the same thing, Brian?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So so the tendency is to only train them to the extent that you need to, kind of a need to know basis,
Mm-hmm.
because they're going to leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then people that stay, maybe you give them that second tier training in the hopes that they do stay. The problem, one of the problems I see in that is, one, that presents risk to your organization, because if they aren't properly trained, then you are introducing some risk into your system. And two, and this is the biggest one, two is if we aren't training those employees, then they don't feel like they belong. They can't be confident in what they do.
Yeah.
And if they're not confident, they're not happy, right? And nobody
Right.
wants to be put in a position where they have to go do something and they don't know if they're doing it right or wrong. And then worse, they get yelled at because they guessed and they did it wrong. And
Mm.
so those people are obviously not going to be happy, and they're not going to stay. So it's a self fulfilling issue, because if we don't train, we don't invest in training, they're not going to stay. So I see training as a really great tool, and remember, when I talk about training, I'm talking about a broad training where we talk about mentoring and coaching, having
Yeah.
their supervisor involved in feedback and checkpoints. Hey, how's everything going? Do you have any questions? That whole two-way communication
Yeah.
engagement. So it's a combo.
No, I'm glad you said that. Is more beyond the classroom for sure, and making the training faster and easier is key, which is what you guys do so well. So there's more, but I think for now we want to respect everybody's time. So Laura, first, thank you. Really appreciate not just your partnership, but your willingness to help the community. And I think there's a lot of good stuff and a lot more we can talk about here. If you're not aware already, alchemysystems.com is their website. Tons and tons of great content there. So encourage you all to check that out and connect with Laura and her team. And as I mentioned, we'll make sure to get this out with the slides and a replay in the next day or so. You can also go to our website at SafetyChain.com. We have a little resources spot, and we have a whole bunch of free content, and we'll have this one up there and included shortly as well. And if there's some interest in learning more about how we can help you on the technology side for your food safety and quality assurance and production work that you're doing in your facilities, we certainly would love that opportunity. So thanks everybody for continuing to support this and being part of the community. We appreciate you. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next month. Have a great one, everyone.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody.